Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Talmidim once asked him, why were the Jewish people in Shushan imperiled? This threat comes out of nowhere. There's no moral decline, there's no great crime, and all of a sudden, Lahashmid, Laharog, L'Le'abed es Kol HaYudim. So he turns to them and he says, well, what do you think? Why were they punished? So they chimed in and they said, because they participated in Achashverosh's Seudah. What's so terrible about this meal? Food was kosher. Chazal darshan a pasuk v'hashtiyah chadas ein ones kadash al Torah. In fact, that was part of the manner that Haman and some of his henchmen tried to conspire to paint the Jews in a negative light to Achashverosh. They had Achashverosh touch some of the wine that the Jews were intended to drink, and of course the Jews refused to drink it because they were all keeping the high standards of kashrus, and this was yayin nesech or yayin shenaga bogai. So it seems like the food and the dietary environment was very kosher. So what was so terrible and so criminal about this meal that it invited this genocidal threat? So to understand that, you have to take a few steps back and place Purim within the proper historical context. The first Rashi in Sefer Ezra provides Chazal's timeline for the events in Paras Umadai. It doesn't exactly stack up with archaeological timelines, but this is the story which Chazal describe. Belshazzar loses the kingdom to Daryavash. The kingdom, the empire, this global influence now transfers from Babel, Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, now to Paras Umadai. Daryavash's son is Koresh. 70 years have elapsed since the first stage of the Churban, the first stage of the Churban of Yehoiakim. 7 years had elapsed. Koresh now ascends the throne in Persia, and he authorizes the construction of the Beis HaMikdash. And everyone believes this is redemption because 70 years had elapsed, and everyone knew that this exile would last 70 years. A flurry of activity, excitement, real enthusiasm. We're back in Eretz Yisrael. But then the process is halted because there are hostile forces in Israel who are opposed to Jewish settlement and opposed to the Jews returning to their homeland. They write letters and protests back to Koresh in Persia. And based on their influence, Koresh halts the entire project for 18 years. Koresh's son, at least according to Chazal, is Achashverosh. Achashverosh then, of course, has a son named Daryavash II, according to Chazal, the child of Esther. And in the second year of Daryavash II's rule, then once again, the Beis HaMikdash is reauthorized. Ezra and Nehemiah lead the groups, small groups, but groups of Jews, 42,000, back to Israel, and the Beis HaMikdash is relaunched, and the full Geula is achieved. There's an 18-year gap between Koresh's first authorization and Daryavash's second reauthorization. That 18-year gap corresponds to an 18-year gap between the first stage of the exile, Yehoiakim, and the final stage of the exile, Tzidkiah. The exile occurs in two stages, 18 years apart. The redemption occurs in two stages, 18 years apart. They knew that it was a 70-year sentence, they just didn't know how to count from which stage of exile and how would Geula unfold. That's the history within which the story of Purim occurs. The story of Purim occurs in Shushan in an 18-year window between Koresh's first authorization, where they started to build, but they were halted and there was a lot of hostility and antagonism and violence in Israel, and the final stage of Daryavash II, reauthorizing the full and complete building of the Beis HaMikdash. It's an 18-year gap. In that 18-year gap, it's not clear when, this event occurs in Shushan. Now, it's one thing to be living in Shushan while Jews are building Israel, settling the land, dying on behalf of Jewish history, sacrificing their lives and placing themselves in the firing line to build the Beis HaMikdash and resettle the land. That's one thing. It's another thing to indulge in 180 days of endless partying, gorging, orgying. That is inexcusable. When Jews are in Israel building their future, Jews in Shushan have to be emotionally identified with the events in Eretz Yisrael. And that's the crime. The horror that Jews are sacrificing life and limb to build the land of Israel, and there are Jews in Shushan who are completely oblivious to it. We're just completely immersed in a 180-day party. That's monstrous. That's a crime. That's why the Jewish people were punished with this threat from which they had to recover. In a broader sense, appreciating Purim within the historical context of that 18-year window reminds us that the miracle of Purim wasn't just a generic moment of national crisis which Hashem saved us from. It provided the thrust to drive Geula to its final conclusion. Geula was stalled. There was a pre-redemptive experience. In fact, the Sfas Emes says that maybe in our final Geula, we'll have a similar preliminary redemptive experience that will be stalled, and then we'll have to provide and discover national energy and thrust to drive it to its conclusion. That's why the miracle of Purim is so iconic. That's why it becomes eternalized, not just because HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved us, but in part because of the national historical import of driving Geula to the finish line when it had been stalled. When the Jews are spared and the Jews are rescued, they feel now we have the backbone, the strength, the support of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to drive Geula to its conclusion. Chag Purim Sameach.